I can't even imagine. Have you heard those words and thought to yourself, neither can I? But it happened. You lived it. But most importantly, you survived it. We hear you, we see you, and we're here to talk about it. We're two moms, lifelong best friends, and we've both experienced traumatic, life-altering events involving our children. Welcome to episode 4 of the I Can't Even Imagine podcast. Thank you for being here. I'm Stephanie.
And I'm Victoria.
So, special announcement, you can now find us on YouTube, Amazon Music, and Audible. We are everywhere.
Yay.
So, Victoria, I believe you have some notes for us.
In the last episode, I was telling my story and I realized that I did not do the proper thank yous that I wanted to do for the people who really came out. We had the meal train that Stephanie had put together and the GoFundMe that Stephanie put together. And so many people came and donated and brought food for my family when I was away in the hospital with my daughter. And I just wanted to let everybody know that I really appreciate it. I would have no idea how to thank everybody individually. So this is a public thank you. It meant so much to me. And I had a couple of customers that came out. One of my customers came into the hospital with two massive baskets of snacks just for me. Just showed up, had no idea she was coming, and it just meant the world to me. So she knows who she is if she ever hears this. So I wanted to thank her for that and the many hours that a few of my customers spent with me on the phone that are in the medical field that really spent time to explain things to me in a easy way for me to understand. So that's my notes, my little housekeeping notes.
So happy belated birthday, Victoria.
Thank you.
Her birthday was yesterday, although this recording is not going to come out for a little while, but I brought her a gift today.
Yep.
And she loved it.
Brand new set of headphones.
I'm a practical gift giver.
I love practical. I need them.
New headphones for the podcast.
Yep.
And they're nice ones too.
I know.
I hope
They're
you
expensive.
love them. Yeah.
I feel special.
Yeah, you are special.
I know.
I'm sorry that I didn't do the annual call at exactly 5:43 at the time you were born, but
that's okay.
Life's a little busy, and I'm sure you were busy too.
I was driving home from work.
So I'm going to a concert tonight. I'm kind of excited.
That's awesome. What are you going to do?
So my husband and I are actually going to see a band that I'm honestly not that crazy about, but he likes them. It kind of shows our age a little bit, but I don't know if you remember Head PE at all.
A little bit.
I want to
What's
say
their
they
song?
were like, their big hit song was I think it was called Hey Bartender.
Sing it for me.
Oh no, absolutely not. They're kind of
remember.
They remind me of that same sort of sound as like when Nonpoint was really big.
Okay.
But they're coming to a local place here, and which is nice. We don't have to go out of town, spend the night anywhere. My brother, the doting uncle. Mm-hmm. My kids are super excited. Uncle Brandon's coming to hang out with them, so he hasn't babysat them in forever.
That's
so we'll see
awesome.
how late the kids are up tonight. So I'm a little nervous about that because it's the
sure.
school night. But yeah, so we're big concert goers. What's the last concert you went to? Do you know?
Hanson.
Yeah, girl.
Yeah, that's right. I was supposed to go to Incubus at the beginning of this month, but the entire family was sick.
Ugh.
And we couldn't make the trek 2.5 hours up to Tampa for the concert. So that was kind of, I don't know. We spent a lot of money on it.
That's a big bummer.
A really big bummer.
Were you able to sell those tickets?
No, we posted them to sell, and we even bought the insurance.
Oh, no.
But the insurance, apparently, if you read like all the fine print, it only applies to something that's out of their control. So not only did we lose the $50 for the insurance that we were
Lost
like,
the
yeah,
tickets too.
it's ticket insurance, and then it was like $200 for the tickets. But it was going to be all four of the kids and us going. Mm-hmm. So $200 is really nothing for 6 people to go to a concert.
Yeah, that's true.
It's really nothing. So I mean, whatever. Kind of sucks, but
I'd be more upset about missing the opportunity to see the band than I would be about losing the money.
Exactly.
Have you seen Incubus before?
No, and I was really looking forward to it because it's some kind of like special
thing.
Oh,
I think they were doing like was it Morning View tour?
The entire Morning View album, and then they were doing like covers apparently. So they were doing like Beatles covers, and our kids love the Beatles. I don't know.
Yeah.
I was kind of disappointed, and I know my husband was really disappointed.
That was at the amphitheater, right?
Mm-hmm.
See, I've seen Incubus at an amphitheater. It's probably that same one too.
No, it was Amalie Arena.
Oh, it was an arena, so that's really big.
It was inside, and so the sound was going to be really good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
was gonna say it was at the amphitheater. I don't like amphitheaters. Even it's like one of my favorite bands. I probably wouldn't even go to an amphitheater show anymore.
No, I went to Chris Stapleton last year. We had bought maybe a year before. Everything's so fuzzy since this last like year and a half has been so weird for me. But we went to see Chris Stapleton. I bought the tickets 7 months in advance, and the seats were like $500 to $800 a piece for the actual seats.
Oh my gosh.
Not going to happen. I'm not paying that kind of money. So they had the lawn seats, and your husband Joe had given us tickets to go see Bush a couple years ago, and we were up in like nosebleeds 2 or 3 steps away from the lawn, and the lawn was empty. And I was like, oh, I'll go see Chris Stapleton in the lawn. $44 a seat, done, you know? So we show up, and of course we're late because we're driving 2.5 hours to get there, and it starts at 7, and we have to like get childcare for our kids and all of these things.
Oh yeah.
And staying overnight and the whole thing. And it was there was so much traffic on the way to Tampa. We took the back roads and everything. It was just terrible. So we were a little bit late, but we missed the opening act. Whatever, no big deal. I don't really like country music. Love Chris Stapleton, you know. And so there's like these stairs and then a platform, all the way up to this lawn. There are people stacked all the way down the stairs onto like the side where all the vendors are. We couldn't even get up. We're squeezing, and we're like, well, maybe they're just packed up there. I don't, maybe it's clear up on the lawn.
Right.
It's whatever. I don't know. So we get up to the lawn. Everybody's shoulder to shoulder. You can't squeeze in. People are getting pissed because they've been there waiting this whole time. They oversold this lawn probably by 10,000 seats it was ridiculous. So we're standing on the stairs, squished. Some guy dumps beer on my back. Aww. You can't hear well.
And then you smell like beer. You smell like beer the entire rest of the night.
And I don't even drink anymore. And that's the depressing part. Like if I was drinking and having a great time. Yeah. So it was the way that the sound goes with that amphitheater. It's like in a, like a fan. And I'm on the outside of that fan. I can't hear.
Oh, it sounds terrible.
It was echoey, and we stayed for 3 songs. I cried, and we left.
Oh my gosh!
And then we couldn't find our Airbnb because they listed the wrong address.
Oh my
couldn't
goodness.
find it. Had to go get a hotel. One hotel left because there was
concert horror stories.
It was awful. I was so sad because I looked so forward to this.
See, I can't name one Chris Stapleton song. I know that name and people love him, obviously, from the price of the tickets and your story, but I have no idea. I don't listen to
I'm going to show you.
Any country.
I don't either. I love Chris Stapleton. Like, into my soul. I love him.
Yeah. I don't even know what he looks like. Not a clue.
He is that, like, long-haired, long-beard country.
All right,
like,
now you're speaking my language
like
a little
real
bit
long hair, real long beard, cowboy hat. He just looks like a normal guy that's going to be on a tractor or digging trenches or something, and he just has the voice of an angel. I love him so much.
Well, I really hope that you get to have the opportunity to see him again.
Me too, at a small venue.
Yeah, I love small venues. Small venues are amazing.
Yeah.
I love the intimate shows they're always so much better. Always. We actually saw August Burns Red, which is a Christian metal band that we both really like, several years back in House of Blues. I had just found out that I was pregnant. I was probably like 8 weeks pregnant. And we met a couple of friends there, and I was getting just squished to death to the point where like I could lift my my feet off the ground and I'd still be upright because that's how tight everything was. And like when I was younger, I'm totally cool with that, but especially being pregnant, I was like, we need to get out of here. And it took forever to get out of the crowd, and we kind of had to watch it by the bar. And in, House of Blues is kind of not the greatest viewpoint from there. And we finally got the chance to see them again just this year. They were leaving like on a cruise the very next day. They were doing like one of those metal like rock cruise boats, which I would love to do someday because I think that sounds so fun. Because I've done a cruise with bands before in the past, and it was really cool, but it wasn't a bunch of metal bands. And so they did this really cool intimate show at like a little club, and we were right up at the freaking like the dude is right there in front of me. I had space. I could breathe. I barely broke a sweat at a metal show. I barely broke a sweat, and I got some awesome photos and video. It was just like the best concert experience as far as like those intimate shows go. I just love that. I wish more bands would do that.
I agree. I'm more into the intimate setting, or if there's a seat that I could sit.
We're so old now.
I was just about to say.
That's how you know we're so old.
That was not our experience. When we were younger, we would go to like all the X Fests.
Oh, to be honest with you, I'm still a stander. I don't want to sit.
I don't mind the stand, but I mean, I did go to Bob Dylan. You said the last concert. I was sitting. Yeah, so I was just thinking about sitting. But we saw Bob Dylan.
Well, that's good. That's a bucket list concert for you.
For sure.
You've loved
and
Bobby
he
forever.
Sounded really good. For his age, he sounded great. The sound of the venue we were in echoed a lot. I think the walls just weren't set up for that kind of full bodied. They had like all the instruments, and maybe it was just because we're cheap and we sit in the nosebleeds, but it echoed quite a bit. And it was kind of tough to like get through that part. But for him being in his 80s, he sounded phenomenal.
Dang. He's phenomenal. In his 80s.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty crazy. I was never a big fan of his music, but I know that you loved him.
Loved him.
Read his book and everything. Let's get ready to welcome our guest, shall we?
Yes, we shall.
All right. Today we welcome Correna Wagner. Correna is a mother of two and the owner of Guided Growth Counseling. She is a trauma-trained licensed mental health counselor. She has a passion for helping women navigate a variety of different seasons in life. Her areas of expertise include perinatal and postpartum counseling, complex trauma and PTSD, or CPTSD, trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, and dialectical behavior therapy, and couples counseling. So welcome, Correna. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi. Glad to be here.
So excited to have you here. So you're here because not only are you actually a mutual friend of ours, and we love you, but you offer a really unique perspective because not only are you in the mental health field, but you are a survivor of trauma yourself.
I am. I am both of those things. Yeah, I think being a therapist was not really on my radar until 2014, where I was like, man, I just want something different for my life. And I actually, believe it or not, feel like this whole journey of becoming a therapist is a total God thing, because I am naturally investigative in nature and was like, I think I want to be a forensic scientist. I mean, I'm an ID addict, let's be honest. Like, I love true crime and all of that. And I was like, I want to be a forensic specialist. So at the time, Kaiser had just created a forensics class or course or whatever, a degree program. And I went and met with a coordinator, and he was like, oh yeah, we can get you signed up, but there's a 2-year wait list. And I was like, I'm not putting my life on hold for 2 years. I can't do that. Mm-hmm. And so I was searching around. I went down the street to Hodges, and it's like, a degree in psychology. What can I do with that? And yeah, I mean, 8 years later, I ended up becoming a licensed therapist. I didn't know it then, but I was eventually born to do this. Mm-hmm. But I actually had a pretty rough childhood. I was raised by a single father and my grandmother. He relied on help from my grandma a lot because my mom wasn't in the picture, and had a lot of childhood trauma, just every aspect of trauma you can think of: physical, emotional, sexual trauma. And there's actually an assessment that we do as mental health professionals called an ACE assessment. So it's an adverse childhood events assessment. And each question, if you answer yes to it, it's 1 point, so to speak. So I have a score of 10, which is every single question is answered yes. Yeah, so it's the highest ACE score. It's not one that I want to have a high score in, but it's true of me. And when I started school in 2014 is when I found out that I had CPTSD, when I started going to therapy.
What is CPTSD for those that don't know?
So we know PTSD is post-traumatic stress disorder, but CPTSD is complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And it really is just more of a long-term exposure to trauma. And it affects developmental personality type things. A lot of people with complex trauma end up developing personality disorders and whatnot. I think the most common being borderline personality disorder. Okay. But there's a lot of overlap with borderline, bipolar, and CPTSD because of the trauma component. But mood disorders, stuff like that, usually develop out of it. The key differences are it typically affects the person's ability to have relationships, struggle with relationships, and also just their perception of the world is just more distrusting. So you have PTSD, you're more hypervigilant of your surroundings. With CPTSD, you're more like distrusting of the world around you. It's everything at a higher extreme. Yeah. But I just want to make it very clear that CPTSD is not its own diagnosis right now. Like, it's not recognized at the DSM-5 yet. PTSD is, but we've studied it and it's developed and it's acknowledged in the field for at least the last decade, for sure. And I do use that verbiage with my clients, but I just make sure they understand that the diagnosis as a whole is PTSD.
Okay.
So what does the treatment look like, something different from CPTSD versus typical PTSD that would be recognized in the DSM-5?
So there's a lot of similar approaches. I think time is a big thing with approaches. Like, so CBT is cognitive behavioral therapy. When you think about that, the easiest way to think about it is a triangle. And so the idea behind it, the man who created it, Aaron T. Beck, basically believed that the way you think affects the way you behave, which actually affects your outcome. And so if we can help the way you think, we can help the way you behave. And so that's the idea behind CBT. That's a very simplified version of it, obviously. But with some basic CBT techniques would help somebody with PTSD in a short term, right? CBT with CPTSD would need to be trauma-focused CBT. Okay. So it would need to be focused more on the trauma, the way the person thinks, how distorted the thinking is. Cognitive distortions is one of the key terms in CBT, stuff like that. Also DBT. The 4 components of DBT are mindfulness, distress tolerance, emotion regulation, and interpersonal effectiveness.
What is DBT?
So dialectical behavioral therapy is what DBT stands for. And it's essentially the idea that you learn how to accept yourself exactly the way you are while also realizing there's parts of you need to change. That's the dialectical in the dialectical behavioral therapy. There's actually a workbook I use that is fascinating, but it actually goes in order. And I do think that this order is very specific and they build on each other. But it starts with distress tolerance, and then it goes into mindfulness. I do believe you have to have a certain amount of distress tolerance skills before you can be fully mindful. And mindfulness, it's really important that you understand the working definition of it. It's not just going and meditating in a corner. Mindfulness is the non-judgmental awareness of your thoughts, feelings, and emotions. Okay. So it's really important that you understand the key word is non-judgmental, and a lot of times we're judging our thoughts, feelings, and emotions.
Like when people want you to do meditation and, the whole goal is to not think at all. And then you're thinking the whole time about whatever, the grocery list or this and that. And then you're judging yourself and then you're upset with yourself.
Right. But mindfulness is, I'm feeling uncomfortable right now. Okay. And then, okay, I feel it in my stomach. Okay. Like, that's interesting. Like, it's almost like learning how to narrate to yourself and just getting to know yourself. Because a lot of times when you experience extreme trauma like I have, you can experience dissociation and detachment from yourself, which is something I've dealt with throughout my whole life. And then there's the emotion regulation part. Anytime you see somebody, you're right, like aggravated, frustrated, like not themselves, that's dysregulation. And you see it a lot more in somebody who experiences this because it's like a brain injury, but it's from the emotional side. And then, of course, interpersonal effectiveness. You tie in everything you've learned, and it makes your relationships better.
So what kind of therapy did you start with?
So I actually started in college. So 2014, actually on my oldest son's 2nd birthday, I started school. So it's, it was a big day. And I went there because I'm the type of person where I know myself so well that I will onboard help before something happens. So I reached out to counselor and was like, I need help because this is really hard. My life was really hard at the time. And I started seeing the therapist who's now my colleague. It's so cool how that works. But, and it was probably like a full year before she used that word, CPTSD. And I became like an advocate overnight in my school. I was talking about silent disabilities. I was the president of the psychology club. And I was like, PTSD really is, or CPTSD is really a silent disability. There's so much challenging stuff, especially when you're first like healing from that. So I went every week, once a week for 2 years. A combination of that sort of foundation and then my education is why I'm as healed as I am. Just constantly learning something new and applying what I'm learning, and yeah.
Like therapize yourself.
I mean, I guess I can't sit here and say I don't, but I think it's really just using the same education I would be giving my client.
Of course.
And applying it. I mean, I don't therapize myself. If I really need help, I'll go get it. And I have had other therapists since.
I just mean like in a way where you're thinking in a therapist way. I mean, if you're having, say you're emotionally unregulated, you're yelling at your kids, you're upset or whatever, you probably have enough knowledge to be like, okay.
Yep.
Recognizing it within yourself, being like, all right, what's going on here? And kind of like talking yourself, almost in the voice of your therapist or something,
Yeah. It's either the voice of a therapist or the voice of God coming through, because, and I'll step aside and I'll say, guys, I'm dysregulated. I'm sorry I shouldn't have yelled at you. I'm very good about that, for
That's
sure.
Great.
Yeah.
Was it always like that, or was it through therapy that you were able to get
through
to that
therapy?
point?
Through therapy, for sure. And I would say probably mostly in the last 3 years.
What was your home life like as far as the I'm sorries? Because if you're so good at saying I'm sorry.
To this day, I can't get an apology. Are you kidding?
Okay.
I don't have a contact with either one of my parents.
Do you think you learned the I'm sorries through school, or because you wanted to be better than?
I learned the I'm sorries through getting in touch with my inner child and giving my children what I needed.
Right.
It's incredibly important.
Yeah.
Like I show up for me, little me, by showing up for them.
Right.
Like it truly breaks my heart if I hurt them. And there's a lot of my parents in me still that I try to shed on a daily basis.
Do you ever feel like your parents, like when you yell or when you do something or say something, that they're coming out of your mouth and you're like, oh God.
It's so funny that you say that. Literally, I said that to my best friend on the beach last night.
Yeah.
I said, I hear my dad coming out of me.
Yeah,
and
I do
it
that
makes
sometimes.
me sick.
Good, bad, or otherwise.
Do you hear your parents in your voice when you yell at your kids? Absolutely, I do.
Yes.
And it scares the shit out of me.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh.
Yeah.
I love you, Mom.
Yeah.
But it's when I sound like her.
Right. And I'm sure they dealt with the same thing, right? Like
my mom's never been in my life, like never consistently been in my life. I've visited a couple times, but when I sound like my mom, that is terrifying. Like that's genetics. That's generational trauma.
Yeah.
That's what people don't understand. That's in your DNA.
Yeah.
Like breaking cycles, that's the Lord's work.
Yeah.
I mean, even in a non-traumatic way, sometimes I'll say something and I sound just like my mom, and I'm like, I sound like my mom. That's crazy.
It'll even get to a point where my loving husband will like call me by my parents' name when I'm acting like them in a negative way, and I'm like, oh, I really have to reel it in. Then I'm like, I'd look at him with like a death stare, and I'm
that's marriage damning stuff. He better.
I'm like, okay,
if you guys want to celebrate another anniversary, I'm not saying you're not.
I
without
love
fault.
both of my parents. I truly do.
I know.
Certain things, and everybody has that about their parents. I hear my mom gripe about her mom. I hear my dad gripe about his parents a lot. So, I think it's just with every generation.
Oh, yeah. I told my kids, I said, listen, you're going to think that I'm nuts. You're probably going to want to talk bad about me. Do it with your friends. Don't ever do it to my face. Respect me to my face, because this is the way that life is. It's just how it rolls.
Yeah,
I'm going to screw them up somehow, some way. And they're going to come at me with the question, why did you do this or not do that? you know? And I think the longer I've been a parent, the more I realize that my parents were doing the best they could with the knowledge that they had at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And they had either, maybe it's something that when I was maybe younger, late teens, early 20s, where I would be very critical of this decision they made or the way that they treated a situation. Now I look back at it and I'm like, okay, well, maybe they didn't have the tools to make a different decision, or react in a different way, you know, because they're coming from their own shit. And, you know, my kids look at me. One time I had to spank my son. I didn't ever hit my kids. I hit him one time. He was 3 and I had my baby on my back, my toddler on my other hand, and him running out into the middle of the parking lot. And I grabbed him and I spanked his butt and said, don't ever run out there again, because I wanted him to hear me and be kind of shocked into, oh my God, I did something so bad. And he's 14 and says, yeah, you guys used to spank us all the time. His perspective is so skewed. We don't hit our kids. It was one time. And then I'm like, okay, how much of my perspective of my childhood is completely skewed?
Right.
Because if they're doing that to me,
Right.
I have to be skewed. So I really have to, like, you know, hopefully remove that filter.
That's good insight and self-awareness.
Yeah, because then you appreciate your parents way more in certain ways. You're like, okay, well, maybe there was something going on that's why they made the decision they made, or whatever, that I would have thought maybe screwed me up forever.
I think it's best if I appreciate my parents from a distance.
That is fine.
I don't have that same sentiment.
So speaking of parenting and having children, how have your children healed you or been a part of your healing process?
Right. So I got pregnant with my son. I think I was 23 when I had
Your first son.
Yes. So I knew his biological dad from the age of 17 until obviously that point. We were head over heels as teenagers, but he was, you know, a cheater and a liar. And I left that relationship, got into a domestic violence relationship, got out of that relationship, got into another one. That one was pretty bad. That one was probably the most physically abusive relationship. Got out of that one and got back with my son's father, which ultimately led me to having my son. He was in a pretty serious relationship, had a child in between our relationship, and I was in the process of trying to help him win her back because we were still good friends. In the process, she was basically like, I don't want anything to do with you anymore, and then we started to be together. It was a whirlwind romance. It always is with him, and you know, we were together for probably about a year before I got pregnant. In that year, there was a lot of lying, a lot of emotional abuse, mental abuse, and it got to the point where I was done with the relationship. And then 2 weeks later, I found out I was pregnant. And so I only stayed in the relationship because I didn't want my child to grow up in a broken home. Mind you, I was living with my parents at the time who were extremely and when I say parents, my dad and my stepmom, not my biological mom, they're extremely toxic. They have their own domestic violence relationship. And so I didn't want my child around that. So we moved shortly after my son was born. The first week of his life, my ex wasn't there. He wasn't there at all. He went to trucking school. When I called his room one night, a woman answered the phone, like that kind of stuff. So I finally got the nerve to leave him when my oldest was a year and a half. At that point, I had pretty much built a very strong relationship with my husband as a best friend. At the time, it wasn't even on my radar to be with him in a romantic way. He was just the sweetest, kindest, most gentle person I've ever met. There was no way I was going to be with him because I didn't deserve him. I was going to hurt him. Literally looked at him in his face and I said, I'm not, you can't be with me. You don't want me. I will hurt you, is what I said to him. And he was adamant, as he's very adamant. And so I gave it a chance about 2 months after I broke up with my ex. And we've been together 11 years in November. And it was the best decision I ever made looking back. He officially adopted my older son when it was actually 3 weeks after we found out I was pregnant. Aww. With my second, with our child that we share together. And so we went into becoming a family of 4, all with the same last name and all with the legal process. But he's been the only dad my oldest son knows. So it's important to kind of understand the relationship aspect of where I come from, right? So I get into this relationship with the exact opposite of literally everything I've ever experienced before. I think for probably the first 2 or 3 years, I was adamant that I didn't want any more children, for a lot of different reasons. My childbirth experience was subpar, and I didn't have any support at all. And I just didn't want to bring any more children into the world. But I just fell more and more in love with my husband and just thought, God, he would be such a good dad, like, even more, like, from birth on. And I was just like, I have to do this one time. Got off birth control, and June of 2015, got pregnant in March, April-ish, somewhere around there, of 2016. So it was May 5th of 2016. I don't know why I was like just so nonchalant. Oh, I'm going to take a pregnancy test, but it wasn't like I wasn't like actually thinking I was pregnant. It was really like I was getting ready to go do something, and I was like, let me just get this out of the way. That was kind of my perspective on it. And I saw the positive, and I was like, really? So that's happening. And mind you, from June to at that point I had really lost hope. I was like, okay, it's just we're not going to have kids. But birth control, I know a lot more now, but it stays in your body for a long time. So I told him, he was excited. Well, we were planning my oldest son's 4th superhero birthday party. So I really quickly went on Word doc and made this like announcement that said my son's name, sidekick, joining us December of 2016. Cute. And and I wrapped it in wrapping paper. 2 days later was his party, May 7th. And we get to the party, everything's great. And we get to the part, and I had, at the time, I had a pretty, relationship with my dad. And he was sitting with my son, and I made him open it. And we got it on video. He's opening it up, and he's reading it. And he's like, what? He didn't understand it, but he read it out loud. And my sister-in-law's like, oh my God. She starts freaking out because she cried when I told her I didn't want to have kids. Did your husband
know, or did you surprise him?
No. Yeah, we did it all together. It was planned together. But my sister-in-law was always super hurt. That's my husband's big sister, because she just wanted so badly for her baby brother to have a baby, because everybody loves David. Like, everybody loves him. And so she was like bawling her eyes out, and then it finally clicked for my dad, and everybody's celebrating, and it was such a great day. But I had a lot of cramping after the party, and I was so scared. I was like, I just told everybody. Maybe it was too soon. I shouldn't have told everybody. And I went to the hospital, and I was scared, and my HCG levels were kind of low or whatever. They were like, come back in 2 days, we'll test it. Which, looking back now, that's totally weird. An emergency room is not going to test your HCG levels. But anyways, I go back. My HCG levels have tripled. So I'm definitely pregnant. Everything's fine. The cramping was basically because I was a mom running around a 4-year-old's birthday party. It was a lot of stress. I was in a dress, too. I had no supportive clothing on. Right. So, yeah. And the middle of the night, that night, I had a missed call from my cousin, and I woke up that morning. I remember feeling very groggy. It was the 10th, and I was sitting on the toilet, and I looked at my phone briefly, and I said, why is she calling me? Like, not a favorite cousin at all. Don't really want to talk to this cousin. Why is she calling me at 2 o'clock in the morning? It's like 7 o'clock in the morning, and I call her, and she's like, hey, I just wanted, and you can hear she's not okay. Hey, I just wanted to tell you that Cassie passed. And I just flipped because the cousin she's referring to is her sister, and it was like my sister. We were like sister cousins. And I couldn't breathe. I was hyperventilating. Mind you, I'm on the toilet. Here's my husband, wakes up, thinks I'm having
He thinks you're having
a miscarriage. Extremely traumatic for him. I'm screaming at him, tell her to stop lying, tell her to stop. I just kind of I just remember throwing the phone across the room, and I'm just just a guttural scream, just screaming. And he picks up the phone and he's like, okay, all right, okay. And I'm just like, it's not true. And he's like, it's true. And, he's crying because I'm crying. And it was the worst. I think it was the worst that I had to call my other cousin, we were like the Three Musketeers. We're the closest. So I'm the middle. So my cousin Cassie was 2 years older than me exactly. I was 2 years older than, and we were all 2 years apart.
That's how me and I have a trio
Yeah,
like
and
that.
we were like sisters. We grew up, and we coped with each other.
Right.
Like we were.
Well, if you have close cousins, are like your first friends.
Yeah.
If you have a family that has
Yes.
cousins, most of the time I feel like
Yes.
cousins are really like your first set of
Yes.
friends.
And telling her was just devastating. Like it was the same reaction over and over. So,
May I ask what she passed away from?
an accidental drug overdose, and she
Oh,
wasn't
wow.
addicted to the drug that she had overdosed. She had a lot of pain that, she stood on her feet all day, and I think that what happened, because we can't know for sure, there's a lot of drama around it, but I think what happened is she asked for something for pain, and she was given fentanyl. And back then, 2016, it wasn't as big of a deal as it is now, and I think she got something laced with fentanyl because there was no way she could tolerate that.
Right.
So
it wasn't on purpose.
right. Yeah. So a couple months later, we had a memorial. I drove back home. I'm from Michigan originally, and we had a memorial, and that was like totally traumatic. Like the drive up there, like I was swelling. I had to stop at a hospital in Georgia.
Just found out. This was right after you found out and
Yeah.
announced to everybody that you were pregnant. How many weeks were you, do you think, at that point?
I can't remember how far along I was when I announced it. I want to say it was like in the 7 or 8 neighborhood. So I was like 12 or 16 when I drove back home. Mm-hmm. But I remember like I was swelling really bad. I had to stop at a hospital in Georgia. Like it was like a rough pregnancy. I had gained a lot of weight after my first child, and I think I developed a lot of like hypertension issues. So I didn't have hypertension when I wasn't pregnant, only when I was pregnant. And so I had to keep my feet elevated. It was just...
In driving to Michigan, you can't really keep your feet elevated.
No, especially when you're a control freak and you want to do most of the driving.
Yep.
So I tried to make the best of it. Got to see, my brother, my cousins, and everybody, but it turned out to be a horrible thing. Like my family's just horrible. So I came back home, went the rest of my pregnancy, and around the 37-week mark, OBs start with their liability thinking and stuff, and I had a really high blood pressure reading at an appointment. And they were like, we really want you to go over to the hospital. I sat in the hospital waiting room for 7 hours while they determined whether or not they were going to keep me there.
They thought you had preeclampsia?
No, I did.
Oh, you did have preeclampsia?
I did.
Okay.
But it took them 7 hours to figure it out.
Ugh.
Yeah. I sat in that hallway just sitting there for 7 hours, and with a 4-year-old, mind you. Not fun at all. And so they finally said, so we had family come get him and take him home, and Me and my husband got settled into a room, and I remember we ate Subway, and it was just like just us. We hadn't had just us in like I think the entirety of our relationship at that point. And so it was like the last moment. So this was December 5th, that night, that we went into the hospital. And I would say probably like around midnight, 1 o'clock, they gave me Pitocin. And they kind of sort of explained everything. And I was adamant I was not going to get an epidural. I was not going to have pain medication. I had come so far. I had done so much work that I was going to breathe my way through it. And for the most part, I did. I actually literally had the nurses cracking up laughing, quite literally until about an hour before he came out, because I didn't feel the intensity of the contractions until then. And I had a photographer. My friend at the time was a photographer. She had done our, maternity pictures. And I wanted to photograph this moment because it was just going to be so different. And I knew it was probably going to be my last child. And my sister-in-law was there. My husband was there, and everything was great. And I started pushing, and my husband's version of the story goes a little different than mine. He says that the baby shot out. I don't remember it that way, but he came out. Everything was fine. I had this glorious moment where, he was laid on my chest and everything was fine. It was amazing. And then it's almost like a horror movie, almost like in a movie where like you have like the great music and everything's harmonious,
and something's coming,
and then you, like the orchestra goes dun, dun like
impending doom.
Impending doom.
Yeah, that's what my literature teacher in high school used to always say. It used to drive me nuts.
Yeah.
Foreshadowing impending doom.
So I remember, so I don't know if this actually happened, but when I remember that moment, the sound goes out for me. I don't have a lot of sound. I do have a history of dissociation because of how traumatic my life has been. Mm-hmm. So I do think that I do think my brain engaged in dissociation at this point. He turns blue. I start hemorrhaging, literally simultaneously.
Oh, wow.
And I don't think I knew how serious it was because I was so focused on my son. I was so focused on, like, are they going to take him out of the room? There's things that I choose not to do with my children, and I didn't want them left alone with my child. And just kept on saying, like, if he leaves, you go with him. If he leaves, you go with him. And at this point, like, I'm the love of my husband's life. Like the relationship between a husband and wife is already established before the husband meets the child, like before the husband becomes a dad, right? Mm-hmm. And so he is like losing his mind because he can see what's going on and I can't, and doesn't want to leave me, but also knows that I need him to be with our son. So they're like, we got to get him to the NICU now. And I'm like, you have to go with him. As the doctor is literally, she was so little that she could actually like put her whole body weight, and she's like pushing on my stomach. And I remember not being super kind as I think I yelled, "Get off me, B word," because it was painful. I remember it being very painful. And she said, "It's okay. You can call me whatever you want. I'm saving your life." And she had a needle in this hand, and she had a needle in that hand, and she went like that to my thighs. She just stuck 2 needles in my thighs to try and help me clot. And I just remember my legs, like, it hurt so bad. And I guess I stopped bleeding. Like, my memory's very spotty.
Was she giving you Pitocin in your legs?
I don't know what the medicine was.
Because, to be honest with you,
I'll probably look at the medicine. Yeah.
I can relate to this story because my poor first child has been through the ringer, as you know from my other story. But when he was born, and Victoria was there, I hemorrhaged too. And they whisked him off because he developed a fever. because I had a side effect from the epidural, and I had a fever. Therefore, it went to him, and he had a fever, and that's the same thing. I was staring at him the whole time. All of a sudden, like 8 nurses rush in, and I'm surrounded, but everything was so foggy.
But you were losing blood at
I
a
was
rapid
losing
rate.
blood at a rapid rate,
And that's why it's foggy for me too.
I heard them yelling, "Give her Pitocin." I didn't actually have Pitocin part of my labor, and I was like, "Oh!" I remember thinking, like, "Oh, I never want."
What I know now,
Pitocin.
I'm pretty sure they were giving me more Pitocin. I honestly couldn't tell you if it was a couple hours, if it was an hour. I get wheeled down, and I see my son, like, hooked up to monitors, and, you know, he's, I don't know, just, it's not how I envisioned it.
Yeah, it's not
at
your
all.
picture.
And one of the things that was really heartwarming was the heart-to-heart thing that they have, where they have, like, the heart, polka dot heart, and one for his bed, one that you keep with you, and it has your scent and everything, and then you swap them out, and every time you go to visit. I love that they do that.
Like a sticker or something?
No, it's made out of fabric,
like a plushie,
like a quilt. No, I have it still to this day. I have both of them.
That's really sweet.
Yeah,
I didn't have that at mine.
yeah. I'll send you a picture of it, but it was really heartwarming. But I was dissociating pretty hard, and didn't know how long he was going to be there for, and couldn't get a straight answer. And I remember, you know, when I dissociate, I mask hardcore. Like, you would never know that I just had a baby, that he was in the NICU. Like, I was just totally on. And we get, you know, wheeled from the delivery room to the regular room. And, you know, I look down at my thighs. You know, this is like several hours later, and bruises the size of Buicks on my thighs. Ooh. Like, just
from the needles.
Yeah, like it hurt worse to walk than it did to use the bathroom. Like, wow. That part of my body that just had a child come out of it hurt less than my legs did. So I had to be wheeled around in a wheelchair, which I don't like. I'm super independent and, like, need to have control of things. So
we were like the same person.
A little bit. But yeah, so I remember it was really quiet in our room, and there was like a chair and next to my bed, and I looked over, and my husband's really emotional, and I'm like, babe, it's gonna be okay, we're gonna get through it. And he's like, no, I need to go. And I was like, go where? He's like, I haven't seen our older son in like 2 days, and I just need to go be with him. And he was like missing my oldest son, which at that point, like, I couldn't even wrap my head around, like, because I knew he was being taken care of, like, and I was like, okay, honey, go, I'll just sleep, and, like, there's nothing I can do here, you know. And so he was like, are you sure? I don't want to leave you, but I need to be with him. And so he just wanted to spend the night with him. And so I stayed there and was trying to pump, and because I wanted to breastfeed. And
how was your baby doing at this point?
He was fine. Like, he was, I don't know if it was aspiration. Mind you, my memory is very spotty. So I'm thinking, you know, he's just there for monitoring. It's going to be no big deal. Mm-hmm. Like, you know. So the next day, I'm like, okay, so he should be able to come out, like, tomorrow, or today or tomorrow, right? And they're like, oh, no, like, he has to stay here until he can eat, like, 90 mLs or something. I don't know how it's measured, but 90 something. And I just remember thinking, like, that's a lot. Like, I'm trying to breastfeed, like, what? Mm-hmm. Like, it didn't feel right. It wasn't computing. Mind you, it was finals week, and I was still getting my bachelor's degree at this point. And I'm like, wow, this is not great timing. I thought I would, as his due date was originally closer to Christmas, I thought I'd be done with school the week after, right? And so I remember emailing my professor. Still to this day, such a wonderful part of my journey, just how graceful he was with me. And hey, I know it's finals week, but I just had the baby and he's in the NICU. And I'm staying a little longer at the hospital. When I realized that he wasn't getting out, I pretty much had a meltdown. I think I sobbed for the whole day. And was just like, I'm not leaving. I cannot physically leave this hospital without my child.
Yeah.
It just was not, it wasn't something I could compute.
How long was he in there for?
6 days.
6 days?
Which doesn't seem like a lot when you think about other people's NICU journeys, but it was 6 unnecessary days. There was literally nothing wrong with him, and the neonatologist was force feeding him. It was only a threat to call DCF that made her release him, literally. Like, I'm not even joking. I wish I was joking. Yes.
Yeah.
I literally threatened to call DCF. I was like, you're holding my child, and there's no medical reason to hold him. You're saying he's not eating well. He's perfectly fine. He was born 6 pounds, 13 ounces. He's fine. He doesn't need to eat what you're saying. You're overfeeding him. It was just too much. So he didn't have any, some of the things that, like, they're worried about with, like, he didn't have any of that.
Yeah.
It was her opinion.
I can relate to this birth story because my son, because of the fever, they put him in the NICU for 10 days, and he was 7 pounds 9 ounces, and their whole thing was they had to administer antibiotics, but they made me believe by day 3 he could come home. They came in, and I'm a brand new mom. I don't understand any of this lingo. And they're like, we need to test him for this, that, and the other. And if he passes all these tests by Sunday, in 3 days, he can come home. Sunday comes and goes. He passes every test with flying colors. And they're like, oh, no, we have to keep him to finish administering these antibiotics. And they're by IV, so you can't do it at home. And I wouldn't leave.
His scalp.
And they had one day,
that.
One day because babies, their veins are so tiny and fragile, and they move around and stuff. So they have to constantly move the IV from their arm to the other arm. And then one day I walk in, this kid has an IV sticking out of his head, his forehead. He had a needle in his head, and they didn't warn me. I had no clue. And I'm like, why is there a needle in my child's forehead? But because of their soft spot up there, the bones are soft and they're not all formed. That's an access point. Yeah. But I had no idea. But he was there for 10 days. Thankfully, in my birthing situation, the hospital that I was at, if they have a free labor room, because the NICU's on the same floor as where you deliver, they will actually open up one of those rooms for you to rent. And it was cheaper than a hotel at the time.
Oh, yeah, they did that for me. I was able to stay there 4 out of the 6 days.
I stayed there the whole time.
The one night that I had to go home before he was able to come home, I was not okay.
Yeah.
I sobbed myself to sleep.
Oh, yeah.
There's something so incredibly unbearable about leaving a hospital without your child.
Oh, my husband forced me at one point. He said, you need to see the sun. We are going to go get some food. I promise I won't take you far away. And I remember we went to Wendy's. Mm-hmm. And at the time, my grandmother was dying. And I just sat there at the table at Wendy's and just lost it, just sobbed because I couldn't go home with my baby, and my grandmother was in hospice and just was losing it. So I know.
So he came home 6 days later, and it was just like that. I was like, okay, he's home. I can go back to school. So I scheduled my final, which was like an in-person, like we had to do what is it called, like when you're pretending to do,
like a mock something.
Yes, we had to do mock sessions and stuff like that. And I was like, okay. And I remember showing up to class, and my professor looked at me like he saw a ghost, and he's like, what are you doing here? And I was like, what do you mean? I gotta do my finals. He's like, you just had a baby, and is the baby okay? Like, is he home? And I was like, yeah, he's home. That's why I'm here. So let's get the show on the road. And that's me. Yeah. Like, as soon as it's done, it's done. Mm-hmm. Like, it doesn't hit me until later. And it hits me like a train. So I get an A on my final.
Good for you, man.
It's just who I am. I just, listen, I had a professor tell me, literally, it was like 6 months later. It was the last week of my bachelor, literally the last assignment. And I'm like, you know, I had a heck of a year. Like, after that, my postpartum experience was extremely, I don't remember anything from the first 2 years of his life that isn't documented by Google Photos or Facebook.
Yeah.
Like, truly, I don't. I don't. And I was just tapped out. It was the last assignment of the semester for me to graduate. It was that summer after I had him. And I called her up and I was like, I can't do this anymore. And I remember she said to me, Correna, your half speed is everybody else's full speed. What are you worried about? And I was just like, I don't know what that means, but once I figure it out, I'm sure it's great. And it took me a little bit to process it. And then once it clicked, I was like, holy crap, she's right. Like, she's not, like, she's right. And so then I got my bachelor's degree, like, literally after having that traumatic birth. And then I felt like after listening to your story, I was just like, I forgot how traumatic Irma was, because COVID and Ian overshadowed that period. But my son was only 9 months when Irma happened.
She's talking about the hurricanes, by the way, for anybody who doesn't live here in our area.
Irma
in
and
Florida.
Ian were hurricanes.
Yes. And so I remember how hard it was. We were without power for 9 days. The first time he got sick was that week.
Fun.
And if you guys don't remember, it was around this time. So
September
literally,
11th. It was on
yeah.
September 11th.
So literally, you released your episode. I'm listening to that. I'm seeing the memories on my page. I'm like, this was a really traumatic time for me. Like, this was also like, it really feels like from that moment, every 6 months, I'll start to regain my bearings and something will happen. So my cousin dies. I regain my bearings, the traumatic birth. I regain my bearings, Hurricane Irma. I regain my bearings, my grandma's diagnosed with dementia. Like, I regain my bearings, COVID. Like, and then my grandma dies, and, like, it's just, I feel like I'm just now, like, getting out of, like, a trauma fog, if I'm honest. But I think the difference with how I deal with trauma now and how I used to deal with trauma is I understand emotion regulation. I understand how to recognize when I need to take care of myself.
And that's a lot from your education. And you have the tools now too.
And it's very important for me that I practice what I preach. Yeah. I do not want to be a hypocritical therapist at all.
You're also human, so I'm sure that's easier said than done.
Yeah. It is easier said than done, but building rapport is really important to me with my clients, and I need them to be able to trust me, so I have to do the things that I'm telling them to do. And it's just, I just hold myself to a higher standard when it comes to that type of things. Ethics is important to me. But yeah, okay. In 2020, in December of 2020, I graduated with a master's degree in clinical mental health counseling.
Beautiful.
And I, about a month later is when my grandma passed away. So it was a really, really hard time to navigate, like, this wonderful.
You had a really big high, and then you go to a really big low, really deep low.
I am grateful that my grandma was still well enough to see me graduate with my bachelor's degree. She was there for my bachelor's. So I'm grateful for that. I'm blessed to have the pictures I do have. But it was hard. It was hard. Nobody was there from my family, because by the time that I got my master's degree, I had woken up to the type of abusive and toxic relationships I had in my life. So I'm sorry, I did have family there, but it was my chosen family. Handful of friends that have been in my life for years, and my wonderful husband and my kids. So I graduated in 2020, walked the stage in 2021, because that's just how those graduations go. But I got my first big girl job at like a full year after graduation, because I was still, taking care of the kids and everything. And I started working for a crisis intervention. And when I started working there, the tier structure was like, I was a master clinician, but there was a licensed clinician that would supervise us. And I was talking to her one day. It was kind of dead. We weren't really getting any calls. Mind you, I went out in the community and basically helped people who were having suicidal ideation either be Baker acted or safety plan. And I was chit-chatting with the licensed provider, and I was like, hey, like, what population do you work with in your private practice? And when she uttered the words maternal mental health counselor, it was almost like an epiphany. Mm-hmm. It was almost like, wait, what? What's that? And she explains it to me, and I was like, this is what I was born to do. And she was like, what? Like, it's such a niche. It's such a specialty. And up until that point, she was the only one in our area for nearly a decade. Like, seriously, like, what do you mean? And I was like, I was born to do this. And then I just I had postpartum depression, I had postpartum PTSD, and I had a traumatic birth and all of this. And I was telling her, and I was like, I didn't even know help like that existed. And like, I wish I had that. And I almost like in that moment dedicated myself to being for women what I didn't have. Mm-hmm. You wouldn't believe how fast. Like, it was March of 2022. And by June, I had a business name, like, filed, like an LLC, and I started July 1st with her in private practice. And I had, like, nothing. Like, everything I have over the last 2 years is from her. Like, every relationship she's built in the community, everything. She taught me everything I know about maternal mental health, and I'm so grateful for her for that. But I have learned over the last 2 years that perinatal, which the term perinatal, for those who don't know what that is, it's all encompassing of everything pre-pregnancy, so infertility, struggles with miscarriage, anything like that, to pregnancy, and postpartum. And postpartum actually is up to a year. But I also have a true gift for couples and trauma and understanding the dynamics that couples go through in that postpartum experience. Mm-hmm. And so that is where my trauma led me. It led me down a road to being able to use this very difficult traumatic experience, a lot of difficult traumatic experiences, to help women and families stay together. Like, the statistics for relationships, like 20% of couples break up after the first child. The number's even higher than that with second children. I don't want to misquote. I don't have the exact numbers, but yeah, it's high. And on average, 20% report relationship dissatisfaction, right? And so I come in and I help with communication skills, conflict resolution, building empathy and compassion for each other, mutual consideration. And couples are just growing and evolving into better relationships, because it's a very unique perspective for somebody to understand all angles. It's not just couples work. It's postpartum couples work, right? And other aspects of their relationship prior to this may come up, and we deal with all of that. But it's a very unique experience, and I usually start with a woman. A woman will be my client, and then, you start to unfold and unravel everything, and you're like, I think we should have a collateral session with your husband.
Yeah, to see what's going on. Why is he being like he is? Because, it's usually the man. Just kidding.
And what I found, I found is a lot of men just need to be validated. And once they're validated, they can then validate. Okay. And it's, I literally love my job. I love it so much. Just watching people transform right before your eyes, walls crumble, vulnerability come out. It's so just like, I don't want to say intoxicating. That sounds like a weird word, but it is. Like, it's cathartic. Like, it's exciting to see. And not every session is great. Like, sometimes it's really hard. We're talking about hard stuff. People are unpacking heavy things, you know. But for the most part, to see the progress that I see with people is incredible. I feel like I'll do this work forever, but I don't know. It's whatever God calls me to do.
I have a question for you. Yeah. So how do mental health professionals like you address the impact of trauma on family dynamics?
Well, there's a couple different ways. I think, so like I was saying, validation is really important. A lot of times, you know, society has calloused men in a lot of ways with emotional vulnerability. Very rarely do I get an emotionally vulnerable husband, but like, it's not rare or anything. But typically, validation leads to vulnerability. And if you can get vulnerability, then you can sort of use insight and awareness to help each person understand each other better. I can't really give therapy to the husband. So if we get one of those situations where like the husband has more of a trauma background that needs to be addressed, I will refer out and that you recommend that he gets his own therapist. But I'll work together with them in however I can help him to where it helps her with her goals. So it's always with the client's goal in mind, but typically it's just trauma-informed care. It's, I don't know how to describe trauma-informed care. I know what it is, but I don't know how to like explain that to you. But, and I think I think what's really important for me to say about trauma, and I don't know, it might be bold of me to say, but from my perspective, I really do believe that seeking safety is the cure to trauma. I can't say that there's a definitive date of when the cure kicks in, because that's different for everyone. But for a person to not be so reactive and not have such a damaged, danger meter, so to speak, they need safety. Okay. Every dysregulated thing a person with trauma does is to seek safety. If you see a highly irritated, agitated person, they're talking to you, they're elevated, they are not feeling safe in that moment. Somebody who has a big ego, lots of defense mechanisms, not safe. It's all to keep them safe. It's important to understand that a lot of times people don't even realize how impactful their trauma was to them until they're validated for it. And when you start to educate people on why they do this and why they do that and where that comes from and the nervous system and what your brain's doing and what your vagus nerve is doing, and when they start understanding and learning all these terms, you actually can start to see the person sort of, it's almost like, from my perspective, I can see how many forms of fences they have around them.
The way you're describing it, I just feel like it's like the layers of an onion peeling away.
Yeah. So imagine it like, did you ever see that movie Richie Rich growing up?
Oh, yes.
Oh my God. So do you know how like 50 doors to open up the vault, right?
God, it's been so long since I've seen that movie.
Go watch the movie. I just watched it the other day with my kids because they love Richie Rich. They love Macaulay Culkin. But
it wasn't Macaulay Culkin.
You're thinking of Blank Check.
Oh, Blank Check. I remember Richie Rich too, though. Yes.
But anyway, so there's like 7 doors. So when I look at somebody with trauma, I can see like, are we dealing with like a picket fence and a chain link fence? Or are we dealing with a steel reinforced wall?
Right.
And a brick wall and a picket fence and a chain link fence? Like, how many layers? And sometimes it's just, like a chain link or a brick wall, half brick wall, not a full brick wall, but that's how I'm seeing people. And, you know, I think it's, I always toot my horn a little bit when I can get through those steel walls, because it's validation and safety. It's so incredibly important to me to make myself safe for my clients, because most of their lives they haven't had that, especially in postpartum. There's so much misinformation. There's so much no information at all, like, that is being received in the pregnancy. I wish I got all my clients pre-pregnancy, if I'm honest, because then they wouldn't need me in postpartum. But I just feel like the safer I feel in my body, the safer I feel in my home, the safer I feel in my relationship with my husband, the safer I feel in general, the less of a trauma response I have. And that's what it's been for the last, I would say for the last 10 years I've been healing.
Yeah.
But I would say the last 3 years has really been transformative, where like people are like, you're totally different.
So I'm just total curious here, but just I'm making an observation since us starting this podcast, and we've been doing a lot of pre-interviews with people and getting ready to, we've basically filled this whole month calendar and into next month, which we're really excited about. But in having all these pre-interviews, I've noticed there's a connection. It feels like every single one of these women have birth trauma. Every single one of them. So that leads me to ask you, do you feel like the majority, because you're really passionate about women, do you feel like the majority of your clients have birth trauma?
I would say there's a high percentage. We're talking in the 80s.
Yeah.
90s maybe. Because it's so crazy that you are finding that connection, because so am I. And I think that, and I actually haven't shared this with anybody else, but I'm going to share it now because it feels right. But I have seen it so much that there is a part of me that actually feels like when my children are a little bit older that I might get into the field of midwifery, because I need to have some sort of impact in stopping this from happening. Like, it has to be greater than me helping women process it after the fact. But it can't happen right now. So it's a dream. But with my track record, I make dreams come true for myself. So it'll happen, I would say, within the next decade. But
I just had a total vision, because Victoria and I both actually had a doula business at one point, and we just couldn't live the on-call life at the time because our kids were so little that we had to, and she was in her business, I had my business, and it just didn't quite work out. And I've always thought, maybe when my kids are out of the house, that could be like what keeps me busy when I'm in like my, late 40s and 50s. And maybe one day I could go to midwifery school. Can you imagine this? What if the three of us? What if the three of us?
I think we're speaking it into existence. I think it would be beautiful, because we can relate so much. It matters so much to us, because we're putting a stop to it ever happening to somebody. We're creating a space for it to stop happening to people, right? But I recently talked with a mutual friend. I won't say her name, but she opened my eyes to some of the legislation we're going to have to work on. So I kind of jokingly said to her, I got 10 years to work on that legislation getting passed before I would ever entertain the idea of being a midwife in this state, because I don't want to be restricted. That defeats the purpose. So there's a lot of liability right now. So there's just some legislation maybe we need to get together and
put our heads together,
get some laws changed. But yeah, I don't want people to go through this ever again. And I will be perfectly honest with you. I don't have anything to verify this, but after talking to my cousin, after looking over her mother and my mother, they were sisters, history, I truly believe that the estranged relationship that I have with my mother started in unaddressed severe postpartum depression, which turned into her not being capable of being a mother
and available for you.
And that is what I'm stopping.
And does that make you then have more empathy toward her?
I have a lot of empathy towards my mom as an adult.
it doesn't excuse the behavior, but it explains the behavior.
Yeah, no, the adult me, the woman in me has a lot of empathy for my mom. The little girl in me is still very hurt.
Of course.
For sure.
As you should be hurt.
Yeah.
It doesn't excuse her behavior.
Yeah.
It just explains it. Now, did she have the tools?
No.
At the time?
She still doesn't have the tools.
Right. And what's her trauma like as a young girl? You know,
lots of trauma.
So it all comes full circle. And then, yeah, that's hard.
Yeah. So I see it as, if I can give the tools and support to even just one woman, then I've helped change the trajectory of other children's lives.
Yeah.
They will have good relationships with their moms. And
earlier you had mentioned when you were after the birth of your son that you felt like you were disassociating and masking. And you're showing everything is fine.
Yeah.
Explain this to me, because I am that person. And I thought I was like, I'm just handling things well. And when you said that, I'm thinking, oh, wow, there's like a pathology there probably that I should probably explore.
Yeah,
so please
it's a psychopathology.
Stop. Oh my God.
Kidding. So, so the best way for me to explain it to you, I hope this helps you. So I've had sort of an on and off relationship with my dad since then. But at that time, my dad and I were good. We were good. My dad was supportive. And I had about a 3-year period between 2019 and 2022, right after Hurricane Ian, where I didn't talk to him. And we had a conversation where I was sort of emotionally vulnerable to him and explained what I was going through back then because of what I had realized about myself throughout that time. He looked at me with utter confusion and said, "What are you talking about?" I had no idea. And that's when I knew how good I was at masking. Right. Because my dad thought I was fine. My dad thought I was totally fine. He didn't know that I was drowning. He didn't know that I was suffering. He didn't know any of it. And he saw me often, talked to me almost daily. And masking is just, it's like going to a masquerade every day, wearing a mask to a party every day.
Now, as you're masking, do you know that you are?
No, at the time I didn't know. Okay. I didn't know what a lot of the terms that I've said here today meant back then, or I would have helped myself. Right. You know what I mean? I definitely think that it is one of those covert things that we do. It's a subconscious thing. But the more mindfulness that you gain, and the more distress tolerance that you have, the more you're able to face it. Because sometimes the thing or the reason you're masking is a distress tolerance issue. Typically, all of the defense mechanisms and coping skills that we have, like masking is toxic, but it's a coping skill. It works for you. It helps you feel normal in the moment. Cycles don't like vulnerability because vulnerability exposes the things that cycle is working so hard to perfect. Yeah. And that's what masking is. Masking is a cycle. And it doesn't like vulnerability. It doesn't want to get to the root of it. And I know how raw and painful your story is, so I can imagine that if you were to go there as much as you probably want to, like to just get it out, just to where you wouldn't be able to function, you wouldn't be able to work, you wouldn't be able to do the things. So in a lot of ways, defense mechanisms are good intentioned, but they're ultimately harmful in the long term. So that's why it's good to have a safe space like therapy for those things to come out, for you to deal with those things. Because, I would hope that all therapists are trained in making sure you're not a gaping hole or a gaping wound as you walk out of therapy.
Yeah. So you quoted something that reminded me that I actually saved something that I refer to this day in the first episode, our little 15-minute episode, the day that I had my breakdown. about taking my son and digging up all his medical history, taking him to a new provider. And after I had cried and calmed down, I opened up my phone to Facebook to just distract me. And the very first thing that I saw, and I don't think this was coincidental, the very first thing I saw was a meme from a friend that said, "Be grateful for triggers because they point you to where you are not free." And I just got the chills reading that just now because my goodness, is that so true?
Mm-hmm.
So true. And like, I don't have as much of an interest in this kind of stuff as you guys do. I know you're like really into the questions and stuff, but I don't know. That just really got me.
It's true.
Mm-hmm.
It's true. And I'm glad that you said that because I do think that there's such a negative connotation with triggers. They're so uncomfortable. And
I hate that word. Even the phrase trigger warning, I'm like, ugh.
Well, everybody uses it so loosely. Oh, you triggered me. You triggered me. Everything's triggering everybody.
Right.
But the reality of the situation is if you're experiencing a true trigger, which you should research what the term means so that you understand it. Just like flashback, it's not like a memory in your mind. You're literally in it. You feel like you're in it. You're almost paralysis. That's what a true flashback is. But anyways, you should be grateful for triggers because they do show us where we need to heal and grow. And it's not something to be afraid of. You got to think about it for a second. Like, we're a generation that was never given healthy coping skills or emotion regulation skills. Like, our parents still don't even know how to, I mean, I'll speak for myself when I say my parents don't even know how to emotionally regulate. They're toxic coping skills left and right. And yeah, so that's the generation we are. And so when we are triggered, we want to shove that away, mask, not deal with it, whatever, but we have to face it. There's so much that I've faced. And if you think about a seed being planted, how uncomfortable do you think it is for that little seedling to break through the surface of the soil? It's probably uncomfortable, right? But it's necessary for growth, right? And it ultimately turns into, in some cases, beautiful, vivacious trees that are really important. They're important to us, to our homeostasis, to our ecosystem. But think about that.
Yeah.
What are you for your environment? What growth do you need to do because you're the tree for your environment, that you're providing for your environment? And every time I think about how I don't want to feel the pain anymore. I don't want to think about it anymore. I don't want to be attached to this. I don't want it to be a part of my identity anymore. I think I have to do this because I am so important to them.
Right.
And that's my kids and my husband.
Very powerful.
Thank you. So if anybody's listening to this and they think, wow, I feel like I'm being, like, I can relate to this, and they feel like they might need help, what's their first step? How can they reach you?
So if you are struggling with any sort of perinatal issues, that's pre-pregnancy, during pregnancy, postpartum, couples issues, or even severe trauma, and you're not necessarily a mom, you can reach me on Facebook. Guided Growth Counseling is the page, and the same for Instagram. Also, guided-growthcounseling.com is my website, and you can reach me there. You can go there and fill out a contact form, and it'll get to me, and we'll schedule a brief 15-minute consultation, which basically is just an opportunity for you and I to get to know each other a little bit and see if we're a good fit. Sometimes I'm not a good fit, and I like to take that moment to kind of figure out if we're a good fit. Currently, I am telehealth only and self-pay. I am in the process of maybe getting paneled with some insurance companies, but that's a process.
It's a long process.
I don't know a time frame on that, but I am self-pay, and it is really important to do weekly sessions in the beginning. There's a lot of information gathering. There's a lot of getting to know each other. But once there's stability, once there's cohesiveness, and a good working relationship. Biweekly is good. I have biweekly clients, weekly clients, monthly clients. I've been working with clients for years. So we do just monthly maintenance sessions and stuff like that. Once you have this one person who knows everything about you and you have all these different life experiences, you just don't want to give that person up, right? You don't want to have to retell the stories. You don't want to fill in the gaps. So it's really important for me to be that for people.
Right.
So yeah, I have several clients who I've been working with for 2 years, and they're my OGs, and yeah, so.
Thank you so much for being here, Correna. We really appreciate you.
Thank you so much for giving me a platform to share my story and my perspective, and I really hope that people are able to learn something and get the help that they need, even if it's not from me. I just want people to be better versions of themselves, feel better.
Amen. All right, we will see you next time on episode 5. Thank you for listening.